Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Yang berbahagia Datuk Syahril Redha Ridwan, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Kumpulan Wang Simpanan Pekerja KWSP, Puan Zarina Zainul Abidin, Presiden Persatuan Pegawai Takbir dan Ihtisas Universiti Melaya, Pekerti, Encik Muhammad Afandi Khalib, Timbalan Pendaftar Kanan Bahagian Sumber Manusia Universiti Melaya, Ahli Jawatankuasa Pelaksana Majlis Sepetang bersama CEO, Barisan Exco Pekerti, seterusnya tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang saya hormati sekalian. Alhamdulillah, pada petang yang berbahagia ini dalam suasana yang santai, kita nampak kita ada beanbag. Yang duduk di beanbag nanti nak bangun kena hati-hati sebab susah nak bangun tu. Kita dah raptai dah tadi. Dan kita dapat sama-sama berkumpul dalam satu majlis perkongsian ilmu. Hebatnya, individu yang diundang untuk berkongsi ilmu pengetahuan dan pengalamannya bukan calang-calang orang. Sebelum kita mendengar perkongsian ilmu dari beliau, terlebih dahulu saya menjemput Puan Zarina Zainul Abidin selaku Presiden Pekerti untuk menyampaikan ucapan aluan. Dipersilakan Puan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Terlebih dahulu syukur kita kehadrat Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala kerana dengan limpah dan kurnianya telah mengizinkan kita semua untuk sama-sama berkumpul pada petang ini untuk menjayakan satu program yang sangat berprestij, iaitu program Sepetang Bersama CEO. Bagi pihak Universiti Melaya yang berbagai Datuk dan juga bagi pihak Pekerti, suka saya mengambil kesempatan ini untuk merakamkan setinggi penghargaan kepada Yang Berbahagia Datuk di atas kelapangan Yang Berbahagia Datuk untuk menerima jemputan kami bagi menjayakan program Sepetang Bersama CEO. Dan kepada sahabat-sahabat Pekerti, mungkin tidak terlewat untuk saya ucapkan salam Aidilfitri dan terima kasih kepada semua yang dapat meluangkan masa untuk sama-sama hadir ke program ilmu kita pada petang ini Dan seperti mana yang telah disebut oleh pengacara kita sebentar tadi, program ini kita adakan di Galeri Seni Universiti Melaya, satu galeri yang menghimpunkan karya-karya daripada pelukis-pelukis ternama Himpunan Koleksi Universiti Melaya. Kerana kita merasakan dengan mengadakan program ilmu sebegini di satu tempat yang begitu indah dalam suasana yang agak santai, diharapkan akan menyuntik semangat baru kepada kita semua untuk sama-sama melahirkan kreativiti dan inovasi dalam usaha kita untuk menjalankan tugas kita selaku Pegawai Takbir dan Ihtisas Universiti Melaya Dan untuk pengetahuan Yang Berbahagia Datuk, kami Pekerti ataupun Persatuan Pegawai Takbir dan Ihtisas ni baru saja ditubuhkan sebenarnya dalam usia kami yang sangat muda, belum pun setahun jagung. Sebenarnya to be exact dalam 3 bulan lebih. Ini adalah program pertama kami, program Pekerti yang pertama. Dan sebagai satu program yang pertama, program ini semestinya akan melakarkan sejarahnya sendiri untuk kami di Pekerti, dan dengan kehadiran tokoh hebat seperti Yang Berbahagia Datuk sudah semestinya lah akan melahirkan dan menyuntik semangat baru untuk kami selaku Pegawai Takbir dan Ihtisas untuk sama-sama mencungkil, mendapatkan pengalaman daripada Yang Berbahagia Datuk selaku tokoh hebat yang kita semua tahu telah memimpin pelbagai agensi dan syarikat korporat di luar sana, dan inilah peluang untuk kita semua di Pekerti mengambil peluang ini untuk menimba sebanyak mungkin pengalaman daripada Yang Berbahagia Datuk Syahril petang ini untuk memacu kita semua ke hadapan Dan kita semua tentu sedia maklum dengan perkembangan yang terkini yang menuntut pelbagai tuntutan baru, cara kita bekerja dan sebagainya, dengan kehadiran pelbagai generasi yang menuntut mungkin cara bekerja yang berbeza di kalangan kita, dengan kekangan yang ada dan keperluan untuk kita mengoptimumkan sama ada keperluan mengoptimumkan sumber manusianya dan juga dari segi kekangan keuangannya, serta dengan perkembangan ICT yang sangat pantas yang menuntut kita semua untuk melakukan mungkin cara kerja yang berbeza, kepimpinan yang berbeza, dan inilah peluangnya untuk kita mengambil pengalaman dan mencungkil rahsia daripada tokoh hebat kita petang ini untuk sekurang-kurangnya memberi sedikit idea kepada kita untuk melahirkan kreativiti dan inovasi di kalangan kita selaku pentadbir Universiti Melaya. Ya, dan dengan topik yang diberi kepada Yang Bahagia Datuk, iaitu moving forward under limitation, saya rasa memang sangat sesuai dengan ketokohan Datuk dan juga dengan pengalaman Datuk menerajui KWSP dan sebelum ni MRCB dan sebagainya. Saya percaya sudah semestinya akan memberi idea baru kepada kita semua pentadbir di sini. Dan saya rasa untuk itu, sekali lagi terima kasih bagi Datuk Syarif kerana menerima jemputan kami, dan juga kepada sahabat-sahabat pekerti kerana meninggalkan tugas tuan-tuan dan puan-puan ya di pejabat sana, dan untuk bersama-sama dengan kita. Kami Barisan Exco Pekerti sangat menghargainya, dan diharapkan pada masa hadapan kami di Pekerti akan dapat lebih menganjurkan program-program ilmu sebegini dalam usaha untuk memberikan satu nafas baru, suntikan baru kepada kepimpinan dan juga untuk menambah baik pentadbiran kita di Universiti Melaya ke arah transformasi Universiti Melaya, kecemerlangan Universiti Melaya seterusnya. Untuk itu, terima kasih sekali lagi. Saya sudahi dengan wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih diucapkan kepada Puan Zarina atas ucapan itu tadi. Seterusnya, saya ingin menceritakan sedikit pencapaian tokoh hebat jemputan kita pada hari ini. Tuan-tuan dan puan sekalian, tokoh hebat ni kalau kita Google nama dia, berebut maklumat dia keluar. Tapi untuk yang kali ini tak payah Google, saya akan bacakan. Beliau telah dilantik sebagai Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif KWSP berkuat kuasa 16 April 2013. Maklumat ni betul tak? Sebab saya pun dapat dari Google. Sebelum ini beliau merupakan Timbalan Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Pelaburan KWSP sejak 1 Disember 2009. Beliau berkelulusan Sarjana Sastra kelas pertama daripada Universiti Cambridge dan ijazah Sarjana Muda Undang-Undang Sivil kelas pertama dari Universiti Oxford, dan telah menyertai Badan Peguam Malaysia dan Bar of England and Wales. Sebelum menyertai KWSP, beliau merupakan pengarah urusan Malaysian Resources Corporation Berhad MRCB, di mana beliau bertanggungjawab untuk membangunkan KL Central sebagai salah satu pusat perdagangan utama di Malaysia. Kejayaan beliau di MRCB telah melayakkan beliau menerima anugerah Property CEO of the Year oleh cawangan FIABCI Malaysia pada tahun 2009. Sebelum itu beliau pernah berkhidmat di pengurusan dana harta Nasional Berhad dan terlibat dalam pemulihan korporat dan penstrukturan semula kredit berikutan krisis kewangan Asia pada tahun 97. Kini, selain dari menjawat jawatan sebagai Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif di KWSP, beliau juga berkhidmat sebagai ahli lembaga pengarah bukan eksekutif Media Prima Berhad, Malaysia Building Society Berhad, pengurusan dana harta Nasional Berhad dan Malaysian Resources Corporation Berhad. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan sekalian, dengan bangganya saya menjemput Yang Berbahagia Datuk Syahril Rizal Ridwan untuk tampil ke hadapan berkongsi ilmu pengetahuan dan pengalaman beliau kepada kita semua. Dengan segala hormatnya, dipersilakan Datuk.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum, selamat petang dan salam sejahtera kepada semua. Pada petang ini, saya ingin mengambil kesempatan lah untuk pertama sekali mengucapkan terima kasih kerana sudi untuk menjadi host lah kepada saya untuk program saya yang pertama sebagai CEO Faculty yang ini di bawah anjuran Kerajaan Malaysia. Dan program ni seperti mana yang tuan-tuan puan tahu adalah satu pendekatan lah di antara industri dengan akademia, di mana harapnya kita boleh menyumbang balik kepada akademia, di mana kita boleh menyumbang experience kita dan pengalaman kita dari segi transformasi, innovation, serta juga apa yang kita tengah buat lah dengan organisasi kita. So today kita akan bincang sikit apakah transformasi dan inovasi yang dibuat di KWSP, Kumpulan Wang Simpanan Pekerja. Tapi sebelum itu saya ingin membuatlah satu, nak katakan ceramah pun bukannya ceramah lah, but I think introduction kepada social security, which I think is very important. Sebab dari segi ini, kalau tidak difahami apakah social security, apakah implikasi social security kepada negara kita, tuan-tuan dan puan akan kurang fahamlah apakah role KWSP, apakah peranan KWSP yang dibuat dari segi ekonomi, dari segi polisi sosial untuk negara Malaysia. Better stand beside them. Okay. Okay, so pertama sekali, apakah social protection atau social security? Now, subjek ini adalah satu subjek yang agak luas, agak complicated, rumit sikit, kerana ia merangkumi dari segi polisi, ekonomi, perundangan, social protection atau social systems atau social security, serta juga demografi sesuatu negara. Dan kalau kita tengok dari segi apakah yang mustahak dari segi social security atau social protection, ia merangkumi the protection of our citizens dari segi bukan saja retirement, tapi juga dari segi medical, kesihatan, dari segi unemployment insurance. Kalau kita tengok dari segi negara-negara Eropah ataupun negara barat yang telah pun memajukan skema-skema social protection di negara mereka, ia merangkumi social protection, welfare, unemployment benefits, retirement planning, and a lot of other social security issues which are important. Di dalam Malaysia ni, dari segi rangkaian Malaysia, apakah yang mustahak pada masa ini adalah policy planning for the purpose of retirement planning. That is why kita ada KWSP. KWSP menjaga dari segi retirement funds for all the private sector workers, termasuklah tuan-tuan puan-puan semua, dan juga we have QAP. QAP basically takes care of the fund management untuk government dari segi pension system. So they take care of the civil service dari segi pension system. Selain daripada itu, kita ada LTAT. LTAT basically menjaga di simpanan for the armed forces punya personnel for their retirement from the armed forces. So di Malaysia ni kita ada beberapa sistem. We don't have a single unified system. Di negara-negara yang lain seperti macam Korea katakan atau Japan, they have a unified pension system di mana semua orang dapat a universal pension at the end of their retirement. Okay. So what is the 4 basic social security guarantees? Di bawah United Nations punya policy, basically every country should be looking at 4 different things. Pertama sekali, essential healthcare. Di Malaysia ni kita bernasib baik sebab kerajaan menyediakan essential healthcare yang komprehensif, dan untuk kita semua adalah free of charge. Walaupun sekarang ni ada satu beban kepada kerajaan dari segi cost tu, but the government is committed towards basically free medical healthcare. So this is the government hospital system where we are actually pretty good. Kalau kita tengok dari segi apakah skop yang dirangkumi, apakah services yang boleh didapati daripada government medical system, is actually on par with a lot of other system. Very close to the British National Health System, NHS, because kat sini kita semua dapat. Tak kira bangsa, tak kira income level, everybody is entitled to the government health system. Basic income security for children, this is something dekat Malaysia ni kita belum ada lagi. Di negara-negara yang lebih maju dari segi perangkaan social security mereka telah pun look at the ideas of essentially universal income or universal basically basic savings. Right? Income security for persons in active age, this is to cover all the people who are in working age. So di Malaysia ni kita ada 2, like I said, QAP untuk civil servants, KWSP untuk private sector workers. And that leads to the 4th part, iaitu basic income security untuk retirement atau untuk old age. And I'll go into a bit of detail how income security dekat Malaysia ni, KWSP plays a part of managing your retirement funds. Now, kalau kita tengok dari segi demographic, every country is slightly different dari segi where are they in the demographic pyramid or the demographic ladder. Dekat ASEAN ni, the oldest country actually is Singapore now, where roughly about 15% of their population is actually already above 65 years old. Dalam definisi global, ada World Bank, IMF atau United Nations, the definition of an aging or an aged nation is when your population above 65 exceeds your population below 15 years old. That is the percentage. Right, so Singapore is already there. They are already basically a developed, not so much developed nation, but an aging nation. Malaysia ni kita akan mencapai status aging nation dalam tahun 2030 hingga 2035. So we are already working towards basically policies to address the issue. Sebab pada masa tu the population that is exceeding 65 years old will exceed the younger population coming in to replace them. And that means that our birth rate is already falling off. I think those of you who are involved in social studies or economic policy studies dekat university ni, you will know basically that the Malaysian birth rate is already dropping off to slightly above replacement level by 2030, 2035. Essentially our population will be static dari segi the total number of growth, but in terms of population punya percentage, we'll have more aged people than young people in the population. Now ini ada implikasi yang besar sebab dari segi economic policy planning, the country has to prepare for a future di mana the number of new workers coming into the system is going to be less than the number of people coming out of the system. So if you look at Europe, for instance, is a classic example of countries which are already going through this transformation, di mana essentially the burden or cost, social security cost to the country is much higher relative to the new income generated. And that's why kalau tengok dari segi the growth rate of those countries have now fallen below 2% already. Japan, classic example, right, where the aged population now is a very high percentage, and the population itself is actually shrinking. So Japanese population, basically in this century alone, will actually go down by roughly about 80 to 100 million people, because they're just not reproducing enough to replace old people. And there, kalau kita tengok dari segi productivity levels and from the GDP levels, GDP growth now is less than 1% in those countries. So demographics actually has the biggest impact in relation to economic policy, economic growth over the long term. In terms of kalau kita tengok macro trends, demographics is one of the big macro trends. The others are things like urbanization, technological innovation, but demographics alone basically is the biggest determining factor of the potential of an economy dari segi GDP growth. And that's why for Malaysia ni pun, the government is now focusing apakah policy-policy yang diperlukan untuk kita semua menghadapi 20 years from now when Malaysia becomes an aged nation. Singapore is a classic example of an ASEAN country yang dah masuk into that status. Their growth rate now is also 2% or below, because the potential of the economy, dari segi productivity of the workforce, basically is already reached a maximum. Now, we have different social security systems in all the different countries lah. Singapore dia ada CPF, which is macam kita katakan counterpart lah kepada EPF. Tapi yang bezanya, CPF dia tak invest duit tu. Dia kutip duit daripada majikan, daripada pekerja. Tapi duit itu semua disalurkan kepada kerajaan Singapura to fund basically the programs of the government there. In return, the government gives them a guaranteed return of roughly about 2.5% to 3% for the money that they give. So dia tak ada macam we invest the money on behalf of all the workers here. Di Philippines dia lain sikit. Philippines basically is not a defined contribution system, di mana apa yang you retire essentially is the amount that of money you put into the system. Di Philippines is called a defined benefit, macam a pension system, just like in Europe and all the rest, where you contribute, but at the end of the day when you retire you get a pension from the government. So when you look at financial literacy, right, which is also a very important part of what we do dekat Malaysia ni, you will see essentially that there are different levels of financial literacy. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, Singapore of course has a very high level of financial literacy, given basically their almost universal education system there. Malaysia right now trading at about 36%. Myanmar supposedly has 52% financial literacy, which I don't quite believe, but that's based on their statistic. I suspect basically their collection methodology untuk their statistic is not as robust as Malaysia or Singapore or even Thailand or Indonesia. But the important thing here basically is that people generally in Malaysia, if you ask them, do you know how to manage your money? Right, most people basically would not really know how to manage money, which is why dari segi policy atau dari segi sistem di Malaysia ni, it is what we call a paternalistic system lah, di mana kerajaan will sediakan a system. Everybody basically is compulsorily enrolled into the system, and the system basically provides one basic investment scheme for everybody. Very limited choice. There are choices, and I'll go through the choices dekat EPF for you to take out the money to invest yourself, right? But for everybody else in EPF basically is one basic scheme. And the reason for that basically is a lot of studies have shown, I think those of you who have read about nudge theory or looked at basically economic behavioral models will know basically that it's always easier for a government to provide a path of least resistance for economic choices. Because that's the best way basically to make sure everybody gets at least a basic level of protection. If you give people too many choices, a lot of them will get the choices wrong, right? And what will happen basically is that a lot of people end up unprotected in the system. So here is basically a classic trade-off lah between economic choice and social security stability for the country. Right? Too much choice actually can lead to instability in terms of the social security system. Now, the multi-pillar framework basically is the World Bank and the UN's system, whereby they encourage all countries to consider what they call the multi-pillar system, di mana you actually have different types of social security policy covering different types of requirements. So here, they call it the pillars, pillar 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pillar 0 is basically, in most countries, based on social assistance. This is, di Malaysia ni represented by our Charisma program, BRIM, Ini adalah aid programs atau the financial redistribution of money from basically those who are taxed to those people who require the money the most, basically those in the lowest economic zone lah dari segi basically their earning capability, right? Pillar 1 is a universal public pension. Di Malaysia ni tak ada, right? So there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate going on sekarang ni dekat EPU, dekat Kementerian Kewangan, whether this is something that Malaysia is ready to adopt or not. In a lot of countries which adopt a universal pension, public pension system, right, the trade-off basically is a higher tax rate, right? So in Europe, for instance, you pay a lot of taxes, you pay a very high tax rate, but you have certainty. Bila you retire at the age of 65, you will get a universal pension. Tak kira what you were earning before, everybody gets a universal pension in Europe, right? But the trade-off, you pay a tax rate when you're working of about 40% to 50% to fund basically the public pensions for all the older people, right? The problem with the system is one of economics, of course. Bila demographics works against you, bila the number of workers, new workers coming to the system are less than the number of workers coming out and enjoying the public pension, then the system itself essentially starts to collapse because you cannot fund the system anymore. Sebab tu, as you know, Europe went through a financial crisis, a public pensions crisis actually. Apa yang mereka buat sekarang ni ialah, in order to make the system workable, the age of entitlement for public pensions in a lot of these countries is starting to move up. So mana dulu macam Greece, right? You all know the Greece punya story. Greece, you used to be able to retire at 55 and your pension was equivalent to 2/3 of your last drawn salary, right? Tak kira what was your last drawn salary, dia 2/3 of your last drawn salary, right? So of course not sustainable. So what's happening now, they have to revise. The pension age will move up to 60, 65 years old. Kalau kita tengok dekat Germany, for instance, public pension now starts only at 63 to 65 years old. Dekat Australia pun sama juga, they will raise the public pension punya age. Otherwise the system is not sustainable sebab dah tak cukup ramai pekerja yang baru yang masuk to the system to pay for all the older workers. Pillar 2 ataupun occupational pension, this is what we call contributory pension lah, di mana bila you kerja, you contribute to your own retirement fund. For private sector, that means KWSP. For public sector, that means you rely on your pension daripada government. And of course, like I said, your LT80, and under this also you have SOCSO. Di mana what we call non-available ni is actually for the self-employed. Di Malaysia ni sebab for self-employed, there is no scheme or no system for them to contribute for their retirement. Apa yang kita ada is a voluntary scheme di bawah KWSP, di mana kalau katakanlah you are a trader ke, atau you're a businessman, housewife, you can save with KWSP for your retirement. But it's not compulsory. So because of that, dari segi dia punya coverage tu tak cukup luas lah. Only roughly about 100,000 people are enrolled voluntarily dengan KWSP. Pillar 3, yang ni baru kita introduce saja dekat Malaysia about 2 years ago. I think most of you know, private retirement scheme. Di mana as an individual you can contribute every year towards a separate private retirement scheme. In order to encourage this, government telah bagi tax benefit lah, di mana you can do a tax deduction for all of you up to 6,000 ringgit per year. Whatever you contribute to PRS, you don't have to pay tax on that money, right? So it's quite a good incentive for you to move in. And pillar 4, non-financial support. This is our universal healthcare system. Like I said, dekat Malaysia ni, kadang-kadang ini kita we don't recognize enough lah the value of the healthcare system dekat Malaysia ni. And I know a lot of us have complained about government healthcare system, semua nak pergi private. But actually, at the very basic, Malaysia actually provides a universal healthcare system, which a lot of countries do not provide. Right? A lot of countries basically you're left on your own. Now, what are the issues and challenges? And this is when we talk about limitations to basically the country or to our system. There's quite a few that we talk about here. One is longevity. Now, again, Malaysians, I don't know why, whether it's cultural or whatever, Malaysians don't believe in statistics lah, for whatever reason, right? Even though it's proper statistics. Kat Malaysia ni, your life expectancy today is about 75 years old. Right? Most of you probably don't expect, most of you think that we're not going to reach 75 lah, but actually, on average, most people will reach 75 or beyond. And of course, statistically speaking, right, the longer you live, technically, your statistical chance of reaching a higher age is much higher lah. So somebody who's 60 years old today, right, can probably expect to reach 80 years old, right, because of your mortality table. Now, of course, there's a difference between men and women. Men, basically, average life expectancy is about 73, women is about 77, right? And basically, what we have to plan for is that longevity will increase. Now, a good example of this is EPF itself. When EPF was established by the British in the 1950s, the life expectancy of Malaysians at that point in time was only about 55 years old. That's why the EPF withdrawal age was set at 55, because the assumption was For the average Malaysian, bila you dah withdraw money tu, you don't have that much longer to enjoy it. So you don't need to have that much savings in hand. But today, with expectancy at 75, katakanlah you reach the age of 55, if you withdraw all your money at the age of 55, you have 20 years to make sure that that money can last you for 20 years. And for a lot of people, that's very, very difficult because their savings actually tak cukup. And again, like I said, most Malaysians tend to be a bit short-sighted. They reach 55, they think, myself enjoy the money while I can, not realizing that they're actually going to live a lot longer than they expect to. And most of you, I'm sure, will know among your own associate, your relatives, right? A lot of people now going well beyond 75 in age. Scientifically, and this has been basically part of a lot of the economic work going around the globe today, for children born in this century, right, roughly about 30% of them will reach 100 years of age, right? And that's reality because of medical technology, because of better nutrition, better healthcare, social security and all that, right? 30% of children born in this century basically will reach 100 years of age. So aging basically is a major issue, and that's why I come back to demographics, right? It's the biggest problem that the globe faces today lah, the world faces today. Kalau kita tengok dekat Japan today, their life expectancy for the average Japanese is past 80 years old already. So they are obviously well on track towards reaching basically that level. Inadequacy of retirement savings. A lot of you will be, I think, shocked to know for the average Malaysian worker yang sampai umur 55 tahun, bila dia orang retire, they actually have only roughly about 130,000 ringgit in their EPF account at the age. Right? And of course, it's a bell curve. You know, all statistics is a bell curve. Right? The top 5% of the population or the working population yang save dengan EPF will have more than enough money for their retirement. Right? The next 20% will have adequate money, but actually for the bottom 75%, right, you will generally have not sufficient money. And the reason for that basically katakan is that when we give guidance to people, kita selalu katakan, for you to retire with a minimum pension of roughly about 900 ringgit per month, you need about 200,000 ringgit at the age of 55. Okay, and then that's just simple mathematics. Katakan you're going to expect to live for 20 years after 55. If you want to have an income of 900 ringgit per month, you must have at least 200,000 ringgit. Right? And you can multiply by that lah, depending on your lifestyle. So if you have a lifestyle of about 4,000 ringgit a month and you want to maintain the same lifestyle, right, then you're going to need roughly about 1 million ringgit at the age of 55. Right? Very simple. It's just it's purely mathematics. Okay? So this is another big issue dekat Malaysia ni. Kebanyakan daripada orang Malaysia memang tak cukup duit at the age of 55 to retire. So what's happening today, as you know, the government has already pushed retirement age to 60. And the reason for that basically is to close the gap between your retirement and your mortality. Right? Essentially, what from an overall social planning point of view, people should really be working until roughly about the last 10 years of their life lah. That's reality lah. Unless you hit 55 with 10 million in the bank account, you can retire lah. But otherwise, I think for the average Malaysian, you can expect you will be working longer. You'll be working until 60 today. Right? In 20 years' time, you know, when we talk about an aging nation, the age of retirement will probably be somewhere closer to 65 by that time. Okay. So it's always important. I always encourage even my own staff when they're first joining EPF, the first thing you do, save money. Don't buy a car, don't buy anything, right? Save your money, invest it. If you actually ever plan to retire well before 60 years old. I already touched about the self-employed, the traders. Kita tak ada sistem yang formal untuk mereka. It's a purely voluntary system. So this group is actually the worst affected. Because they have no formal saving system dari segi retirement. They basically will always go through life basically without sufficient retirement savings. Low financial literacy, talked about, and of course a social security framework. Now this is what I was telling you about demographic changes, right? In the 1950s, tak sampai 50 years old pun was your expected mortality. Today is already about 75 average, right? In about 20 years time, we expect that to reach about 80 years old for Malaysia. And that's why, like I said, you know, those demographic changes, there's the economic policy, your own personal working life will change tremendously. In some countries around the world, there is no longer even a retirement age. Right? Australia, for instance, no longer has a minimum retirement age. People can work for as long as they want, right? And basically purely on performance. Kalau kita tengok sini, this is the proportion, like I said, the percentage of the population above 60 plus and those between 0 to 14, the young. Right? We expect, and this is based on Department of Statistics punya numbers, by 2030, 2035, those lines will cross and Malaysia will become an aged nation. That means we do not produce enough young children anymore to replace the older people. And this rate of change in Malaysia is one of the fastest in the world. Kalau kita tengok, the interval in which percentage doubles from 7 is basically Malaysia is aging faster than other countries. So we will actually hit that barrier a lot faster than a lot of our peer countries. So what does it mean? You need more savings, you need to work longer, you need essentially to plan for a longer retirement phase. So this has implications dari segi public policy, from healthcare policy, right? How do you provide for geriatric care, for instance, for people? And this is basically also an opportunity, and this is something we've been discussing a lot in the government. What are the industries which will benefit from this? What is the kind of academic research which benefits from this? So if you look at the path taken by a lot of developed countries, there has been a lot of focus now in universities on geriatric studies, for instance, in retirement planning, in property development. A lot, kalau kita tengok in Japan, and we invest a lot in Japan, right? A lot of investment in retirement homes, medical care for the aged, for the aging. Right? These have all become big boom industries in developed countries. Right? So kat Malaysia ni, whereas today, for instance, property development is focused on first-time home ownership. Right? In 20 years' time, property development will be focused on retirement villages. We will focus on basically on retirement homes and that kind of provision because it will be dependent on the demand from the market. So when it comes to universities, I think when we talk to universities, we always encourage them to start thinking in the long term, right? Creating programs for students to become experts in, for instance, in old age planning, in social security planning, and in retirement planning, basically. Because these are the industries of the future. When you talk about 20, 30 years from now, right? Malaysia will need people who are technically skilled, who are basically experienced in this kind of fields. So when you talk about inadequacy of retirement savings, roughly only about 20% of our members, I can mention to you, basically are on track to achieve the minimum advised amount of savings yang kita tengah advise kat orang. Today, right, 65% of our EPF members, when they reach the age of 55, actually have less than 50,000 ringgit in their accounts. And the reason for this is historical. Dekat Malaysia ni, because Malaysia for a very long time, our economic policy was based on the promotion of Malaysia as a low-cost investment hub. Right? So part of the low-cost investment hub, the government for a long time effectively suppressed wages, essentially to keep Malaysia as a low-cost competitor. So we're now seeing the economic effect of those policy decisions. Right. So I think those of you who are in the economics side of the faculty, you understand. Economics is all about the rational decisions you make and the economic consequences of each of those decisions. Right. So the economic consequence of our low-cost policies of 20 years ago, 30 years ago, basically is a workforce that today is retiring with very little money in their savings account because their wages were suppressed for a very long time. Right. And of course, like I mentioned, most people don't actually know how to manage a lump sum. So apa yang mereka buat bila dah sampai umur 55, kalau katakan dia keluarkan duit tu semua sekaligus, a lot of people will essentially spend the money within 3 to 5 years. Right? And this is again empirical. We actually did a study dengan on this issue. And the main problem basically is that most people don't know how to manage a lump sum. If you get 100,000 ringgit in your hand today, right, would you invest it properly? Or like most people, they'd say, okay lah, I'll belanjakan some of it I'll save. What happens mostly is that most people don't know how to save the money and how to invest the money. So this inadequacy of retirement saving, like I mentioned, the low salary, low contribution rates, before we changed the rules in 1995, and of course, because we allow people to withdraw money for housing, for medical, for education, bila sampai umur 50 pun, dari segi government policy, kita biarkan, we let people take some money out from their retirement account, right? So what happens basically is that people end up taking too much money out. When they hit 55, they can't basically do it. So what have we done about this? I think as you know, last year, kita buat a public survey, a consultation dengan the population of Malaysia. And we have now changed a lot of the rules which are coming into effect on 1st of January 2017. So some of the rules basically will also apply to some of you here. I see quite a few young people here. What it means basically is that for those of you who decide to work beyond the age of 55, any new contribution that you contribute after 55 will be locked away in a new account, and that money cannot be touched until the official retirement age of 60. Right? Your age 55 withdrawal you can still take at 55, but you keep working beyond 55, any new contributions, basically, we have decided in order to protect you for your retirement and for your longevity risk, basically, you can only touch at the official age of retirement. Right? Secondly, we now allow people to keep saving money with us until 100 years old, right? And this to allow for the fact that a lot of people actually, because they don't know how to manage money, right, rather than withdraw the money from us, leave it with EPF, you can just withdraw on a monthly basis. So sekarang ni, you can actually set up your own private pension scheme dengan EPF. Whatever savings you have dengan EPF, bila sampai 55, katakan you nak withdraw RM1,000 sebulan, you just instruct us, we will do a standing instruction. Every month RM1,000 into your account, until your money runs out lah, at the end of the day. Minimum retirement age, like I said, already 60 years old. You can expect that will move up, right, over time. And of course, dari segi members' behavior and lifestyle, I think we are encouraging people not to take out lump sum, but to plan for their retirement. So for the self-employed, apakah yang kita buat? Like I said, more encouragement. We are working with government now. Kita bagi tax exemption kepada mereka yang memilih untuk menyimpan dalam voluntary scheme ni, and government will actually top up your account as well. So they'll essentially give you an additional up to 240 ringgit a month, 240 ringgit a year into this account if you save for yourself for the future. And this is from dari segi economic policy again, basically trading off some short-term support from the government to offset against the long-term financial support required. Katakan kalau orang tak simpan duit, because if they don't simpan the money for themselves for the future, they become the government's problem 30 years from now. So the government would rather encourage you to save money today, and then you become dependent on government to bail you out 30 years from now. Okay. Financial literacy also, this is something we're working on dari segi transformasi KWSP. So, whereas in the past KWSP was all about services dekat counter, sekarang ni we're actually transforming a lot of our branches to become retirement advisory service centers, di mana for any member, basically you can come to any of our branches, you can get free financial planning advice, right, from our trained people, and they will help you to plan for your retirement, they'll help you to plan basically your savings pattern, your spending pattern, and this is part of the whole transformation, because we need to move KWSP from just being a operational, process-driven organisation towards basically what's required for the future, which is basically advisory service. So how are we doing this transformation? It's probably a good time to talk about that, because I think that's something you're all interested in. Apa yang kita buat, today dekat KWSP, we have what we call a 5-year rolling strategic plan. If you know, most companies, most public policy is based on fixed 5-year plan. Di mana katakan 1990, you have a plan 1990 to 1995. Or today you have a rancangan Malaysia ke-13, for instance, right? Where you just have a fixed 5-year plan. So a lot of global corporations have now moved to a rolling 5-year plan. So EPF pun kita buat sama juga. So now we have a 5-year plan, but every year that 5-year plan is updated. So every year we look 5 years ahead, where do you want to be 5 years from today? And then we then plan accordingly, we make adjustments to the plan, and we make adjustments to our budget and our processes accordingly. So today, EPF has decided 5 years from now, we want to transform into a service organisation, into an advisory organisation. So we are spending a lot of resources to retraining our people to become from front counter, basically just processing application, processing documents, into basically advisory service. That means they're being trained to become registered financial planners, professional qualifications, and everything else. And then how do we manage in terms of managing basically the transformation on the operation side? Because today we basically handle roughly about 35 million transactions per annum for all our members. A lot of that is now moving online. So we did a big change for employers. Dulu kalau katakan majikan, you would submit a borang every month for all of your employees, manual punya borang. So you come to the counter, you submit the borang, you bagi check to make payment. Starting from 2 years ago, we moved them all online. Today, roughly about 90% of employers now submit online to us through our internet portal. Payment pun dah boleh buat online through either Maybank to you, any of the Maybank account, any of the internet banking accounts. So gradually all this manual work is being moved online. So similarly, I think here as well, I think you're doing a lot more online in terms of your portals, in terms of self-service. So for our members as well, katakan all of you, if you want to do a housing withdrawal today, tak payah nak datang kepada branch kita, a lot of it can be done online as well. Especially katakan nak pay down your housing loan ke, pay down your ansuran, basically you can just do online with us. We're now also doing withdrawal for education also online. So kita dah mula dah dengan PTPTN, we are starting with UTM, I think UM belum lagi kot, but essentially for any parent nak hantar anak mereka ke universiti, dulu they had to go apply to university, dapat borang, confirmation, pergi kepada branch KWSP, apply to the withdrawal. Sekarang semua boleh buat online at on premise of the university itself. So katakan PTPTN, you go to PTPTN, You just use your thumbprint, they will verify the system dengan our system, and the money is just moved automatically. So we eliminate all the double handling. Sama dengan medical withdrawal as well. We're now piloting a project dengan IJN. Katakanlah you pergi IJN, you ada heart attack, nak pergi operation. Kalau dulu, you kena bayar dulu, then you can come and claim money from EPF, nak buat withdrawal. Sekarang tak payah. We are planning a system whereby dekat IJN, you letak thumbprint aja at our reader there, and then they will do an automatic matching with their record here, and we can then make payment directly. So the whole idea basically is that to remove or move a lot of the processes online, self-service, and has been very successful. Over the last 4 years since we started this initiative, the number of transactions done at the counter has been decreasing by 10% per annum, right? As we move everything online, right? So we're only leaving essential services at the counter. Everything else now is self-service through kiosks, through internet portal, mobile app. Our IT team basically is about roughly about 200 strong now, and our technology punya group, and they do everything. So we create our own mobile apps, we manage our own systems, internet security, network upgrades, everything is essentially in-house dekat APM. And the whole idea basically is that just like a lot of banks or organizations globally, technology will become the center point of everything that you do. Therefore, the investment in technology, dari segi system and people, is probably one of the biggest investments that any organization will do. And I think universities will be no different as well. Eventually, you move a lot more to e-learning, online, everything else. My daughter, who's just going into college in UK, basically everything is now online. All the reading materials, everything is e-books, everything is EPUB. You go through either laptop or iPad, no longer any books, and it's actually very, very efficient. So assignments can be sent to them even though they haven't started work yet or started studying yet. So I suspect basically for universities, for all of you, it'll be the same. Right? Eventually, you'll move to a paperless environment just like we are, and eventually all your reading resources, everything will be online. So if you look at financial literacy, that's how we're tackling it. What we're doing basically is to actually change to advisory service and allow people to come to our branches to get service and advice rather than getting processes. Okay, I won't cover this one, that's a bit detailed. So dari segi fragmented social security framework, apa yang kita tengah buat ni dengan government, we are in the midst of getting all the relevant agencies together to actually look at setting up what we call a National Social Security Protection Task Force di bawah EPU, di mana kita akan menolong EPU untuk menjanakan polisi-polisi dari segi ekonomi atau social security for the long term. And this is very important because, like I said, 30 years, it's not even, roughly about 20 years away from now. It's not that long from an economic policy planning point of view. So if we don't start now, in terms of economic policy, in 2035 we'll have a demographic time bomb in terms of how do we deal with these issues. The biggest issue here, of course, is as I always say, is always politics. Politicians only have a 5-year time frame in terms of getting elected to the next round, right? So how do you get elected officials to plan for 30 years when, and I can understand their point of view, all they're worried about basically is getting elected for the next 5 years. So that's always been a major issue in any country in terms of long-term economic planning. Implications, of course, right now we have very fragmented data. Kita ada data, LHD ada data, the health ministry ada data. But eventually, just like a lot of governments around the world, we're all working on a centralized data pool, di mana for every citizen, essentially, and Malaysia will be quite easy because we all have an IC number already. Right? A lot of countries don't even have that. For every citizen, basically, based on your IC number, essentially there'll be a centralized data pool. Right, effectively we will know your tax history, we'll know basically your savings history, everything. Right, so the whole purpose basically is not so much Big Brother, but more to allow for better financial planning and better resource allocation for the future. A lot of the problems that the BRIM project or the BRIM campaign right now is going through is their data is not great. So what happens is that a lot of people who actually are not entitled to BRIM payments are still going through the system and getting BRIM payments, even though they actually they don't need the money. Tapi sebabkan data tu is not comprehensive, is not well coordinated, and because of the political need to get the money out, right, a lot of people are slipping through and getting money when they're not actually entitled. So these are things which you can close the gaps, one to become more efficient in terms of government. Of course, there is health issues. I think most of you may not be aware, but Malaysia is one of the least healthy countries lah. Dari segi whether you look at diabetes, obesity, right, cholesterol levels, right, we are not doing too well. So I think there's a lot of studies already being done. So one of the proposals which was recently mooted at the budget dialogue was actually to do like UK today, you actually have a sugar tax. Right? So instead of subsidizing sugar, if you do right now, you should actually increase the tax and the cost of sugar to discourage people from consuming sugar. Right? So I think that's something that government is actually seriously looking at at this point. Kalau kat UK sekarang, if you beli soft drinks, right? If your soft drink exceeds a certain amount of sugar level, there's actually a tax on it to make it more expensive, to try and encourage people to actually go for healthier alternatives. Right? So there's a lot of tax planning policy as social security policy. And of course, cost of living, medical costs, as you know, is increasing tremendously. Right? This actually is a major burden on government. Sebab we don't see it in the general hospitals or the clinics, right? But actually, government is shouldering an increasing cost of medical healthcare for Malaysians, right? Because there is no Malaysia tak ada co-pay system. In some countries, you have universal healthcare, tapi dia ada co-pay system. Everybody must still contribute some money for every time you visit the doctor or every time you ambil medicine. Whereas kat Malaysia ni, you bayar RM3 saja. Whatever it is, you bayar RM3, right? So that is increasing to be a huge burden on the government in terms of cost. So dekat EPF ni, what is our responsibilities, right? I've already gone through some of it. We collect the money on behalf of all the members. Kita collect lah daripada majikan, daripada pekerja. Everybody contributes 11% and 13% or more, depending on your contract with your worker, with your employer. And then we invest on your behalf, right? So sekarang ni kita ada only one scheme. Come 1st January 2017, we will have also a Sharia compliance scheme. So for those members yang nak a fully Sharia compliant scheme, they can switch out of the current scheme to a fully Sharia compliant scheme starting 1st January 2017. And we're starting the enrollment on 8th of August this year. So that one we expect to be quite popular, because I think there's a lot of demand from our members who want to have a fully Sharia compliant scheme. Right? And of course we distribute the members like I mentioned. Now, this is, like I said, we have nearly 70 branches across the whole country, serving about 14 million members. Number of transactions every year is going up. The number of transactions we do every year is going up by roughly about 5 to 6%. Right? But like I mentioned, most of that we're now moving online. So the number of transactions dekat branches actually going down by 10% per annum. So most of the offload in terms of the actual work is now being done on system-based, internet, call centers, via basically self-service kiosks. So the actual face-to-face required is a lot less now. Right? And this is something which, if you look at it, there's productivity is tremendous. EPF today is one of the most efficient pension providers in the world. Our cost of running the EPF is only about 27 cents for every 100 ringgit of assets that we have. It's far better than any other global pension fund in the world today. And we're able to do this because we are able to move, in terms of productivity, everything online, and essentially in the last 4 or 5 years especially, moving to technology. Sekarang ni, we manage roughly about 700 billion ringgit. We are the 8th largest pension fund in the world, and total income last year was about 44 billion ringgit. Last year, EPF was the highest dari segi revenue and profit in the whole country, better than even in Petronas last year. So last year we paid out about 38 billion ringgit as dividend, roughly about 6.4%. This year I think it will be a bit tough. Kalau tengok dari segi market, and we can talk a bit later during Q&A about economy, the market today. If you look today, it's a very problematic dari segi volatility, because you had all kinds of political incidents. You recently Brexit, then of course now you got the coup in Turkey. All these things add basically to the vulnerability of the market dari segi the returns over time. Now, when you look at contribution rate sekarang ni, we actually are one of the highest in the world. For salaries below 5,000 ringgit, there's actually about 24% contribution, 13% from employer and 11% from employee. Above 5,000 is 23%. Right? So you're actually contributing the percentage of your income quite a lot already, quite enough. The problem has always been dekat Malaysia ni is wage levels, income levels are too low. Right? Salary levels are too low relative to the amount of work being done, because of that suppression of Malaysian incomes that I mentioned about through economic policy. Right. So what's happened recently, as you know, 3 years ago we introduced the Minimum Wage Act. The whole idea is to start moving up wage levels from the bottom up. So as the bottom moves up, the top should also start to float as well, higher. So this year, minimum wage will move from 900 ringgit to 1,000 ringgit, right, already in effect from July. And hopefully that will then filter through to the higher levels as well, as people start to earn more and start to save more as well for the retirement. Kat EPF ni kita ada 2 account. Every time you contribute money to us, your money goes into 2 accounts. Account 1, which is meant for your retirement, right, which you essentially only touch basically upon your retirement. Account 2, which is allowed for pre-retirement withdrawals. So whenever you come to EPF to withdraw for housing or for medical ataupun education for your children, you're drawing down from account 2, right? And we always encourage people, kalau boleh, try not to utilize your money in EPF. That is meant for your retirement, actually. So the more you draw down from EPF today, the less you will have when you retire. Again, like I said, it's economic choice lah. And you know, everything in life is about economics at the end of the day. What we allow basically dekat account 1, and this is where we allow some freedom of choice. If you have enough money in account 1, di mana essentially you exceed the levels that we state, you have the right to actually invest some of the money yourself. So you can choose your own unit trust. Katakan you believe that you want a global equity trust, you can go ahead and do that. Right? We allow you to do that, and that the whole idea basically is to balance individual freedom atau individual choice dengan the protection of the whole country punya social security system. And of course dari segi apa yang kita provide the saving schemes, assistance, death assistance and incapacitation assistance, and this is provided to all members irrespective of your income level. So provided you haven't reached the age of 55 yet, if you happen to meninggal, right, your waris, your next of kin can come to EPF. You will get 2,000. They'll get 2,500 ringgit as assistance for funeral expenses ke apa-apa expenses. So similarly, katakanlah you suffer injury and you are unable to work, then you will get incapacitation assistance of up to 5,000 ringgit. Now, investment I think is a very interesting subject. How does EPF invest your money? Okay. Now, given the fact that we have to operate a single universal scheme for everybody, right, the scheme itself has to be fairly uncomplicated. So there are actually two main drivers of the investment decisions that we make. Firstly, basically to preserve capital, right? So we need to make sure that we always have at the very least a 2.5% nominal dividend every year. Secondly, to make sure your money grows in terms of cost of living. So our main target is actually inflation plus 2%. This one is actually not the main target. The main target is for the EPF dividend to be inflation plus 2% on an average 3-year basis. And this is important sebab kalau kita tak boleh mencapai inflation plus, then the value of your money will actually decrease over time as inflation basically erodes the value of your assets. Now, in terms of basic retirement advice service, like I said, we started rolling out last year. This year we're rolling out another 10 branches. Our plan by over the next 5 years, every single branch will basically have the capability to provide free financial planning advice for all our members. Okay, and of course, at the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve? A meaningful life for all our members, so that essentially they have a meaningful retirement, a better retirement, and that's why social security is very important. Dari segi healthcare, dari segi basically social security protection for the aged, also very, very important subjects for the future. And of course, what we're trying to do in order to enhance EPF scheme is to get our members to appreciate a few key facts. Pertama sekali, they should look at increasing their saving and contribution. Not necessarily with EPF. You can save money in PRS, the private retirement scheme. You can save money in other things as well. But we want people to be aware that they need to save considerably a lot more than they think they need to save. Most people think that EPF alone is enough for them. For the average person, it's not going to be enough. For the average worker, you actually need to have roughly about a 35 to 40% savings rate in terms of your salary, right, in order to make sure you can plan for your retirement. Okay. Lagi satu, the power of compounding. Right? Those of you who are in economics, accounting, finance-related fields, you will know. The longer you leave the money in your saving scheme, whichever saving scheme it is, katakan ASB ke, tabung haji, you don't touch the money, the power of compounding dividends basically will help you to achieve your financial retirement. Right? And that's why we always encourage people, right? Kalau you nak pinjam duit pun, pinjamlah duit untuk a productive use, right? Buying a house, buying an asset which actually appreciates in value. I always tell people, right, buying cars in Malaysia is the worst thing you can do. Sebab kat Malaysia ni dah lah harga kereta tinggi. Sebab our tax punya policy on cars in order to protect our local industry is very prohibitive. But you're essentially borrowing money to buy an asset which depreciates in value over time, right? So it's a very bad combination. So we always encourage people, kalau tak mampu, belilah kereta second hand dulu. Because there's no point buying a new car in Malaysia unless you are willing to effectively take the depreciation hit, as well as basically pay for the interest cost on buying a new car. So these are the amendments that I mentioned. We've already put through new contribution after age 55, locked up, basically EPFI, simpanan syariah yang akan wujud pada 1 Januari 2017. Mana yang berminat mulai 8 Ogos tahun ni bolehlah datang kepada mana-mana branch kita. Senang saja, datang saja dengan IC with your thumbprint. As long as your thumbprint match your IC, you can register for the scheme. You'll be surprised how many people's IC and thumbprint don't quite match. Then this one is basically between us, more cooperation between us dengan Co-op and the pensionable system. And of course, for unclaimed monies now, like I said, you can keep the money dengan EPF sampai umur 100 tahun lah. And of course, for under ILO principles, because we are a signatory to the ILO convention, starting next year, we will start treating foreign workers the same as local workers. That means they also can start withdrawing for housing, for education, and all the rest as well. So, what is the roadmap for the future, for social security planning for Malaysia? I think one basically which the government needs to address quite critically is healthcare costs. So, how do we provide universal healthcare, right, in a sustainable way for the country? Di mana either we move to a co-pay system or to an insurance annuity type system, di mana everybody also contributes some money towards their future healthcare costs. Because otherwise, the current system is not sustainable. Right? Coverage to informal sector, very important. How do we encourage those who are not in formal employment to voluntarily save money for their retirement? Right? And of course, the social protection master plan for the future, which I was mentioning. And this is basically the structure of what we're doing for the future. Di mana sekali dengan all the other agencies, Bank Negara, Securities Commission, AKPK, the various ministries, we're all putting our databases together to essentially plan for the future for Malaysia. Okay. And this is basically some of the forward thinking that we talked about. Di mana katakan here, for instance, like I mentioned, walaupun demographic is a challenge, tapi it's also an opportunity. Di mana there will be new industries created to cater basically for the silver-haired generation. Right? A lot of new industries. When you look at the changes to demographics, how does it change property? How does it change banking, for instance? What kind of products are required for the future, right? In 20 years' time for this population. And ini tak payah nak reinvent the wheel. Actually, you just have to look at Korea, for instance, or Japan, right? They are already going through this change already. Right? So a lot of concepts that you see in Korea or Japan today, right, will become common in Malaysia also in 10 to 20 years' time. Right? So from a university planning point of view, I think it's good to increase your cooperation with the Japanese or Korean universities who are looking at these issues, because these are exactly the same issues that your students will need to learn or need to know, right, as they hit the workforce in the next 10 to 20 years. Dari segi social security, like I said, holistic lah. Apa yang kita kena buat for universal coverage, whether it's for retirement planning, whether it's for healthcare, right? And of course, this part actually has a big impact on city urbanization, city planning. Right? A lot of the most livable cities in the world, and kalau kita tengok, there are many surveys, whether it's economists, whether it's World Bank, livable cities today, right? One of the key characteristics they have is their infrastructure is designed towards an aging population, right? So better public transport, road-friendly pedestrian punya walkways. If you're an old age person in a wheelchair in KL, I think kesian kat you lah. There's no way you can get around any of the KL streets, because DBKL doesn't think at all about provision for wheelchair access on the pavement ke apa, mana dia tak ada kan. But you look at Melbourne, for instance, or you look at New York or London, a lot of provision now for aged people. Right? So even city design, architecture, engineering will change to cater for all these things as well. So dengan tu, I'll wrap up the lecture part of the discussion. But I'm more than happy to take apa-apa soalan pun on EPF ke economy, any subject. Normally when I do my town hall with my own staff, basically is an open free for all. Dia nak tanya apa pun boleh. So similarly here, whatever question yang nak tanya, please feel free to go ahead. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang bagi Datuk, terima kasih for very informative, and I think it's we learn a lot over the last one hour. I think we get to know a lot more, even though KWSP is just next door. Not many people have actually got the chance to actually go through the content that you have presented with us. I mean, earlier you were saying that you would be very much interested to discuss with us further on the economic, because I remember that this year in 2015 when you declared the dividend, the chairman declared the dividend, it was against expectation because at that time the economy was not very good, and now 2016 is even more challenging. So our question, my question is actually, how, if you can share with us, how are you going to go through or steward the EPF, our fund, for this year and beyond, taking into account the economic challenges and all the things that has happened now? Thank you.
It's actually a very good question. Kalau kita tengok 2015, the financial performance of EPF, it's actually testament to a lot of the planning that we do. One of the key fundamentals for any successful investment strategy is diversification. So dekat EPF ni, especially for the last 5-6 years since I joined, we've been really pushing towards diversification. In 2009, when I first joined EPF, our global assets was only about 6% of our total assets. Right? By the end of last year, it was roughly about 27% of our total assets. And the reason for that basically is that we have to recognize the fact Malaysia ni is actually a very small economy. Right? If you look at EPF at 700 billion ringgit in size, we are far too big to be investing only in Malaysia. Sebab Malaysia ni memang kalau kita tengok bursa Malaysia pun not many big companies. If you actually look at global companies, right? If you look at, for instance, Apple alone, Apple's valuation is roughly about $700 billion in size. Right? You look at Google. Google is roughly about the same. Right? One of those companies is equivalent to all the listed companies in Malaysia. Right? So when you look at EPF ni at 700 billion ringgit in size, right? We are already the 7th, 8th largest fund in the world. We cannot be just focused on Malaysia. So we decided in 2009 we will do in a very big way a diversification program. So we invested in global equities. We're actually big shareholders of things like Google, Samsung, Mercedes-Benz, Procter & Gamble, McDonald's. And we did global equities, properties. So in 2015, when we had the oil crisis, di mana harga minyak turun, that pulled down the economies of a lot of commodity countries, so macam Malaysia, Australia, and all the rest. Now, Malaysia basically, you saw the ringgit move from about 3.8 all the way to 4.5. Because of our diversification, right, that helped to basically magnify the returns from our global assets. So in 2015, right, every dollar that we earn overseas, right, was worth roughly about 15 to 20% more in ringgit terms. And that diversification basically helps to maintain the stability in our income. So 2015, I think that did well. 2016 is a slightly different picture. The first quarter of 2016 basically was a very difficult period for all global markets. So even the developed markets, emerging markets, all had the same trouble. Right? That's why you would have noticed in our first quarter result, which we announced, basically we're down against the first quarter of last year. Right? So we expect this year to be pretty difficult. Second quarter, you had Brexit, you have an ongoing crisis in terms of growth in Japan, in China. And honestly, if you ask me, I think, in terms of economic outlook, it's probably going to be pretty bad for at least another 1 year before things hopefully will start to turn around. That's why last week, if you notice, Bank Negara Malaysia cut the interest rate, right? For the first time in a very, very long time, in fact, they cut interest rates. Right? Because they know from their data as well that the Malaysian economy also is going to face some challenges. So for them, better to cut interest rate now, provide a bit more liquidity to the banking system, to people, to keep people spending money, so it basically can help to keep the economy going for a while. So of course, officially, if you look at what they said in terms of when they made the announcement, right, they didn't quite explicitly say that, but the data all points to that. So our exports, Malaysian exports have been down, it's still going down, and Malaysian domestic spending also, because combination of the introduction of GST last year, plus basically I think people generally feeling less confident about the future, spending has been down. And those numbers, I think those of you who are in the economic side will see. Car sales, right, always a good indicator, car sales are down. Property sales, basically also down. A lot of property developers are holding a lot of stock at the moment. So if Bank Negara doesn't do something to prop up the economy in terms of liquidity, right, then this will continue to slide. So hopefully I think you will see basically Bank Negara being more active in trying to manage expectations. Now, what does it mean for funds like ourselves? That's why we keep telling people to focus on the inflation spread. Sebab walaupun the global economy is not doing well, the good thing today basically is that unlike previous financial crisis where you had both a revenue side downfall, here you have the revenue side is weak, growth is weak, but inflation is very, very weak as well because of overcapacity built during the last decade in terms of all the industries and a lack of demand. So global inflation today is probably going to be running about under 2%. Malaysian inflation we expect to be somewhere between 2 to 2.3% for the year. Right? So because of that, in terms of meeting our inflation plus target, I think we can still try to achieve. But the nominal dividend of course will be down. Right? But that's why I'm telling people, in a low yield environment where Today, if I buy a government bond, 10-year government bond, Malaysian punya bond, it's only about 3.4% return. Right? If I buy a 10-year US Treasury, right, it's only about 1.5% return. Right? So it's a environment today where yield is very difficult to find. So people need to be cautious about what they're investing in. Right? Because even on a personal side, a lot of people get trapped into trying to chase a higher yield, always forgetting that there's always a higher risk involved as well. Right? So that's basically, I think, just in a nutshell, I think the importance of diversification. And this is not just for EPF. Even at a personal level as well, diversification is very important. For yourself as well as an individual, you should never have all your savings in only one place. You can diversify juga lah, between different, either different unit trusts or different savings providers, because you never know who's going to perform for you and who isn't going to perform for you.
Dipersilakan untuk bertanyakan soalan.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Datuk dan sahabat-sahabat semua. Saya ada satu soalan di sini. Kalau kita tengok those days, university actually is not a profit-oriented agency. We are focusing on education. But at the end, because of the government imposed budget cutting, especially to University of Malaya, is about 27%. So we have to generate our own income. Unfortunately, we do not have the capacity or expertise. Some as investment, I would say that the ROI tak nampak lagi lah. But then we already put a lot of money to invest, but at the end, no return at all. So what do you suggest in terms of university, especially to run, to generate our own income?
I think kalau kita tengok dari segi successful university models in terms of self-funding or in terms of basically how they manage in an era of public cuts to policy spending on education. If you look at the universities in the UK, for instance, right, the same thing happened to them. But the universities there basically then essentially had to refocus in terms of at the core, what is your product? Your core product is education, right? So what they did there basically was they were forced to essentially re-look at their education punya offering to move towards offering subjects which there was high demand in terms of basically industry, right? And then essentially open their doors to fee-paying students, right? Which is what the UK universities did during the 1990s when they were forced with the same issue today, right? Budget cuts by public spending. What they did essentially was they commercialized the education product. Because the education product is the bread and butter of any university, right? I think when you refer to investments in, for instance, in technology or investments basically in terms of R&D and all that, yes, it's valuable, but you have to understand that those tend to be in investment terms what we call macam private equity lah. Either you make a lot of money or you end up burning a lot of money because those investments never pay off, right? And the trouble with that kind of investment in, for instance, in commercialization of technology or patents, you don't know what is going to be a hit or not, right? And the trouble is you're competing against a wider environment. So if you look at historically, I think the UK universities, right, where they have had a lot of success is commercializing their base product, which is the education part itself, right? Which is really important because that is the one thing you actually have control over your product. There is segi quality, there is segi quantity, and the offering that you have for your customers, which is your students. The other product, which is basically commercialization of your R&D, right, is hit and miss, right? The best universities in the world, macam MIT or Caltech and all that, they accept basically a very low percentage of success on those investments because they approach it like private equity. In private equity, when we do private investment, you invest 10 different things, right? 3 maybe will do okay, 1 will be a standout star performer, and 6 lagi you burn your money, right? So if the university is not prepared to culturally have that shift in attitude or shift basically in focus and accept failure basically, right, then you shouldn't really be doing too much of that. Because if for university, if every time you invest in 10 project, 2 burn, hilang duit, and then becomes a political problem inside the university and outside, then you must as well not try and do that because you don't have the right cultural attitude towards it. That's why MIT and Caltech are very successful in this, because they have a very entrepreneurial attitude. They know, like venture capitalists or private equity, right? They don't mind. They know out of every 10 project, 6 hangus, 3 okay, 1 superstar, that 1 will pay for everything else, right? But you must have that ability to swallow the 6 failures, lah, right? So if you don't have the mindset, right, or the entrepreneurial mindset to do that, it's going to be very hard for any university to start moving. It's a very gradual process. You can slowly move into that frame. That's why, to me, like I said, obviously, you guys should know better. But looking at historical other economies where the universities had to move into private sector, they focus mostly on the education product first, right? Because that is the one thing which you can control the product.
Thank you, Dato'. I'm a retired government servant, but I have not closed my EPF account. My money is still there. And this was based on the advice of Tan Sri Halim. We are friends. Okay. Now, for how long can I keep my money in EPF? And is it better than to keep it there than putting it in, say, in the bank? Because the dividend is better by EPF.
Yeah.
Am I correct? And how long I can do this? As I said, this is the advice of Tan Sri Halim.
Okay. Like I said just now, we're changing the rules. So basically, for our contributors, you can keep the money with us until 100 years old, right? When we came out with the new legislation to go up to 100 years old, in consultation with MOF, I think essentially, fundamentally, boiled down to this, right? 100 years should be enough for most people, right? To keep the money with us. If by some miracle you live beyond 100, I mean, good luck to you, but you're going to be in a very statistically minor minority, lah. Now, in terms of returns, we never promise that our returns will be any particular level. But if you look at historical track record of EPF, I think we have always consistently paid higher than any bank FD, right? And we have consistently paid beyond the inflation rate. Especially over the last 6-7 years, we've generally paid about inflation plus about 3.5% to 4%. So if you have the patience, basically, to allow your money to accumulate and to draw down gradually from your money, then it's always better to keep it with us. Right? And you can always access the money anytime. Once you're past 55, right, you can withdraw the money at any time you want. So really, it's a free option for you, lah. Unlike a bank where in order to get the best interest rate, you have to place it on FD, right? Your money is locked in for 12 months or 18 months. With EPF, you can always constantly draw down, and our return is calculated basically on a rolling basis anyway, so you don't lose out on that. But like I said, last year we paid 6.4%, banks for 1 year FD probably about 3.5%. So that's roughly about a 2.5% to 3% differential in terms of returns, which is quite significant, lah. But like I said, we cannot promise that they will continue forever. Our returns depend a lot on how the markets perform, because we're very heavily invested in equities, in property and everything else. Whereas the banks basically is just a custodian business, an intermediary business between your lending and their lending to other people, and they make the margin in between. Right, so the banks always basically will have a margin.
Assalamualaikum, Dato'. Saya Pendi daripada bahagian University Department UM. Just to get some insight from you in facing this difficult situation now and coming, how do you prepare the main resources of the organization, which is the people inside the organization, to face the situation? Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we remain focused on basically is our 5-year plan. Right? I think for someone, especially macam KWSP ni, we take a very long-term view. Right? When we plan for our contributors' retirement, we look 20 to 30 years ahead. So we always know, because we've been through this before, we've been here for 50 over years, you will always have short-term volatility in the markets when markets perform badly. It's happens basically every 6 to 7 years, right? So just about the right time, lah. So this is 2015, 2016. Our last big crash was 2008, 2009. Right? Before that was 2002, the dot-com bubble busting, right? And then before that was a commodities crisis, the Asian financial crisis. So you can expect regularly, every 5 to 6 years there will be a downturn, right? The point of the EPF basically is to keep investing continuously. So even during the down period, we still invest. Right? We don't stop investing. In fact, we actually increase our investing during the down period. So macam sekarang ni, when markets, for instance Brexit, right? When Brexit happened and the markets all took a huge fall for over 2-3 days, we were actually in there buying up the market. Because to us, basically, when you're investing for the long term, right, you should always take opportunities when people are panicking or people are worried to buy into the market and buy good assets for the long term. Right? So we do that. Similarly, even in our human resources, sama juga. So during tough period, and we know like for instance like this year will be a tough period, our revenue is probably going to be less than what we did last year because of the market, but we don't cut on training, for instance. We don't cut on our planning for the future. So we still invest in the technology, we still invest basically in the training for people, because you have to look 5-10 years ahead. You cannot think that just because this year is going to be a bad year, you cut a bit of money on training. Because to me that's a bit of a false economy lah. But you save a bit of money today, right? But you're sacrificing your long-term strategic plans for the future. So for us, yes, we accept, right? This year might be tough, but tak apalah, we've gone through tough times before. It's not a big deal, right? You just work your way through it and you plan for the future.
So thank you for your insights. The behavior pattern you're suggesting is basically for very corporate sectors. But I'm sorry, but if you look at government sectors, it's knee-jerk. The moment allocations are cut, they go into a shock. What would you suggest for government departments and agencies?
Yeah, but just to remind you, EPF came from a government background, right? Prior to our big transformation in the year 2000-2001, we were just another government department, another government agency, right? But my predecessor, Tan Sri Azlan, basically decided that, okay, we will transform EPF from being a government-style or government-run agency into a very corporate-run agency. And we did a big bang in 2001. We changed all the systems. We changed the way we work. Today, if you look at EPF, in terms of customer service, we are ranked #1 in Malaysia against everybody, banks, telcos, right? If you look at our internet offerings, right, it's developed in-house. We have our own technology teams developing mobile apps, everything, right? So you can make the change. Of course, it takes time. It took us about 10 years to get to where we are today, right? But it's possible. Now, coming back to basically to this knee-jerk reaction on cutting of expenses, I think part of the issue, I guess, that you guys are facing, from what I understand, basically, is that you had no forewarning, right? No prior disclosure that this was going to happen, right? So that, of course, creates havoc in terms of planning, right? If you didn't have enough notice that you're going to lose a substantial chunk of your funding or a substantial chunk of your revenue, then it's going to be very hard to plan for it. But I would still suggest essentially, basically that if you remain focused on long term, what you need to essentially focus on basically is the long term development, right? And if the direction really is, like I said earlier, is to move towards being a more commercial organization, right? I don't think the mindset is right for all the universities in Malaysia, not just UM, right? To actually move into this entrepreneurial, let's do a lot of investment in commercializing our technology and all that, because to be honest, I think none of the universities here actually have much experience in commercializing anything in terms of whether it's technology or research, right? So it's going to be very hard to go down that path. Right? You actually have to work on forming linkages with industry, to work together to do it. It takes a lot of time. Whereas your quick win really, to me, from looking from outside, is really your education, right? And you focus on that, you focus on your education product, right? That's where you can probably start generating incremental revenue to offset the cut in public spending.
Hello, Dato' Subra from Ministry of Higher Education. We are just here to listen to your talk because we know EPF have done a lot of transformation. So I just want to know how you manage your officers or staffs in the level of transformation of thinking. What is your expectations to your officers or staffs, and what type of freedom you give when it comes to transformation thinking? Thank you.
Yeah. It's a good question. It's actually one of evolution. Like I said, when we first started, 2000, 2001, we were just like any other government department, very top-down lah, right? So everything was decided at the top, semua ikut aja lah, ikut perintah, right? But in order for the first transformation to succeed, you have to do that. Basically, the top says, okay, I don't like the way you guys are doing work, we're going to move to this new model of doing work. I know a lot of protests, a lot of feedback, and during 2000, 2001, when we did the first transformation, there was a lot of pushback from the staff. But we used the top-down approach and say, don't care what you say, you guys are going to do it this way from now on, right? So that was the first part. Then once people got used to the new way of doing things and they saw the benefit of it in terms of better customer experience, the interaction with customers was better and all that, then we moved to the next part where we started giving more freedom for people to actually plan, right, their own transformation. Today is more decentralized. So when I mentioned to you about our move 2 years ago to move all the employees online, right? What came down from HQ to all the branches and all the people, departments, was basically just a matter of policy. We're going to set a target by, in 5 years' time, we want 80% of employees to be online with us. What we then told each branch, you are taking care of your own employees in your area, you come up with your own strategies, how you're going to tackle that. This is a target, how are you going to do it? So we left it to the branches to plan their own strategy. Of course, we gave them some help in terms of tools and all that. But essentially, every branch manager was essentially told you have authority to do whatever you want to try and get the target. Now, the way we then make sure that people were focused on the target was that it's very transparent. So every month, right, we would show every single branch where how many you have done, how many % of your employees you have converted. So dia macam league table lah, right? So that really drove competition because nobody wants to be the guy at the bottom lah, right? Because then every year at the annual branch conference punya meeting, right, everyone will look at you and more or less laugh at you lah because you tak sampai target. So because of that, right, we actually pushed everybody and we actually achieved the 80% target 2 years ahead of schedule in terms of what we want. So the trick basically, like I said, right, the initial part, there's no choice because you're coming from a very top-down authoritarian kind of style. The first transformation, you have to use that style to transform. Then once people have enjoyed the benefit of the new transformation, then you can start moving towards a more collaborative approach and then to a more independent approach. Right? You have to have different styles or different processes, basically depending on the phase or the maturity of the organization at the point in time.
Any questions?
Sorry, just one more question because I think you did mention about the Sharia index. So maybe if you would be able to promote to us what will be the option, what will be the advantages of a Sharia, so that at least we get some ideas come 8th of August. Thank you.
Basically, we've known for quite a while that there's a lot of demand for a Sharia compliant punya retirement scheme, right? And this is because, for a lot of our members, especially those young Muslim, right, they are concerned that because it's a single scheme under EPF, their money is invested in things like banks or tobacco, for instance. Dulu lah, sekarang dah tak ada tobacco dah. Right? So starting about 6-7 years ago, we decided basically that we're going to start transforming our investment punya philosophy. So sekarang ni today, we adopt what is called ESG, Environmental Social Governance punya criteria for investing. So today EPF no longer, we don't invest in alcohol, gambling, tobacco pun kita dah stop dah for any new tobacco investments. We avoid weapons manufacturing, arms manufacturing. So it's an ethical portfolio. The difference of course is that ethical portfolio is still not quite Sharia compliant because we still invest in banks. So we started to accumulate a lot more Sharia assets. Today EPF punya asset base, about 45% is actually Sharia compliant already. So we are ready to offer to members the option, kalau you nak, is option to switch from the current scheme to basically a scheme of saving di mana 100% Sharia compliant, meaning that no investments in conventional banking or conventional insurance punya services, right? Other than that, actually there's no difference because both portfolios are still ethical. They still invest in the same industries. The only difference is the Sharia one basically avoids conventional banking and conventional insurance, right? So that's why we can offer it because we already have enough assets across all our geographies, our markets and asset classes to do that. Now, when you talk about promote, we're not actually promoting this. We are leaving it as an option or a choice to people because it is not compulsory if you're Muslim that you must switch to Simpan Sharia. There's no compulsion. It's up to you as an individual whether you want to switch or not. In fact, Simpan Sharia is open to everyone, open to non-Muslims as well. Right? It's really whether you want something that's a bit more sustainable from a point of view of basically the investments, because banking historically has always had a very close link to GDP growth, right? In times of growth, banking does very well because it's a leverage to GDP growth. When times are bad like now, banking tends to do worse because of that leverage to GDP growth, right? So in modeling, of course, when you look at it, the Sharia punya portfolio should be more stable over time, right? The conventional portfolio will have more ups and downs, but over the long term, both portfolios roughly will give you roughly about the same returns because they're both invested in the same asset classes, the same geographies, even if the exact investment is not exactly the same. But over the long term, 20-30 horizon is roughly about the same. It's really just a matter of preference for the individual.
Baiklah, saya kira itu tadi soalan terakhir. Dan terima kasih Datuk. Majlis mengucapkan setinggi banggaan atas perkongsian tadi. Saya mohon Datuk kekal di pentas untuk sesi selanjutnya. Saya dengan ini menjemput Encik Apandi Muhammad Khalid mewakili Kementerian Pendidikan Tinggi untuk menyampaikan watikah pelantikan CEO Fakulti Program kepada Yang Berbahagia Datuk. Silakan. Seterusnya, saya menjemput pula Puan Zarina Zainul Abidin selaku Presiden Pekerti tampil ke hadapan untuk menyampaikan cenderamata kepada Yang Berbahagia Datuk. Pohon sirih, pohon selasih tumbuh merimbun di hujung laman. Kalungan budi, junjungan kasih menjadi kenangan sepanjang zaman. Bersarang lebah di pohon palas, burung kelicap di pohon selasih. Pengetahuan bertambah, penerangan jelas. Majlis mengucapkan terima kasih. Terima kasih Puan Zarina. Buah selasih, buah kelubi di dalam dulang hidangan pagi. Terima kasih daun keladi. Bila diundang Datuk, datanglah lagi. Sekian saja majlis sepetang bersama CEO kita pada hari ini. Semoga kita bertemu lagi di lain masa, di lain ketika. Seterusnya saya jemput tuan-tuan dan puan sekalian untuk menikmati sedikit haringan yang disediakan di ruang annex di sebelah sana. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.